So how does a village with absolutely no new land, zero modern technology, and a rapidly expanding population just, avoid starving to death?
It's a pretty heavy question.
Right. I mean, we often look at the modern economy as this impossibly complex machine. It's just
Okay.
a dizzying blur of stock tickers, algorithmic trading, global supply chains.
Yeah, it feels completely disconnected from basic human survival.
Exactly. But if you strip away the servers and the container ships, the fundamental gears driving global finance are, well, they're the exact same gears that determine whether a farmer in a remote field gets to eat tonight.
The mechanics don't change, just the scale.
Right. So today, for this deep dive, we are looking at an economic miracle and, honestly, a profound economic tragedy by zooming in on a single fascinating place.
A hypothetical village called Palampur.
Yeah, Palampur. And to our listener, welcome. We're so glad you're here with us. Today's mission is to basically learn how a whole economy works from the ground up.
It's like the ultimate laboratory for understanding wealth. By shrinking the entire global economy down to the size of a few dirt roads and a couple of hundred families, we remove all that noise.
We can observe the raw mechanical forces of land, labor, and capital just colliding in real time.
Exactly.
And to really pull the curtain back, we are diving straight into the foundational text. I actually have the source material right here.
Awesome.
We'll be looking at the exact text, reading through the passages that lay out the blueprint for this village, and unpacking the hidden mechanisms behind, well, practically every sentence.
Because understanding the rules that govern Palampur is the absolute fastest shortcut to understanding how giant multinational corporations operate, how national economies grow or collapse, and even how your own personal household budget functions.
Right, because the laws of production, they just don't care.
They really don't. They are entirely agnostic. They do not care if you are cultivating a half acre of potatoes or manufacturing lithium-ion batteries on some automated assembly line. The constraints remain identical.
Okay, so let's jump right into the blueprint. I want to start by looking at how the text introduces this village, because it immediately sets up a microcosm of a much larger system. I'll read the opening passage.
Go for it.
It says, quote, "The purpose of the story is to introduce some basic concepts relating to production, and this we do through a story of a hypothetical village called Palampur. Farming is the main activity in Palampur, whereas several other activities such as small-scale manufacturing, dairy, transport, etc., are carried out on a limited scale.
Hmm.
These production activities need various types of resources, natural resources, man-made items, human effort, money, etc. As we read through the story of Palampur, we will learn how various resources combine to produce the desired goods and services in the village." End quote.
Okay, so the word hypothetical does a lot of heavy lifting there.
Yeah, it sounds like it's just a fairy tale.
Right, but we should ground this in reality immediately. Palampur isn't entirely fictional.
It's not.
No, it's heavily inspired by the fieldwork of an economist named Gilbert Etienne, who spent significant time studying actual villages in the Bulandshahr district of western Uttar Pradesh, India.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So while Palampur doesn't have a real zip code, it is an incredibly accurate composite sketch of thousands of real agricultural economies.
So it's an archetype.
Exactly.
And the passage leans immediately into this concept of production. It defines it as combining natural resources, human effort, and man-made items to get goods and services.
Which is really the underlying heartbeat of civilization, if you think about it.
How so?
Well, to produce anything of value, you have to follow a recipe. You take inert things that exist in the physical world, you apply human energy and intellect to them, and you transform them into something that solves a problem or satisfies a desire.
Like alchemy, almost.
Yeah, kind of. If you think about the device you are using to listen to this deep dive right now, it is just sand, rare earth metals, and plastic,
Just rocks and oil, basically.
right? But human effort and man-made machinery transform those natural resources into a smartphone. Palampur is doing the exact same thing, just with wheat and dairy instead of microchips.
That makes total sense. And it isn't an isolated ecosystem either. The text paints a picture of a village that is highly connected.
Yeah, it's not an island.
Let me read the next passage detailing the physical layout and the infrastructure, because this is where the economy actually starts moving.
Oh.
Quote, "Palampur is well connected with neighboring villages and towns. Rayganj, a big village, is 3 kilometers from Palampur. An all-weather road connects the village to Rayganj and further on to the nearest small town of Shapur.
I'm going to pause you right there just to dig into that term, all-weather road.
Yeah, it sounds like a minor civic improvement. Like, okay, they fixed some potholes.
But economically, it reads like a massive catalyst.
Yeah,
It is the difference between life and death for a local economy.
really, just a road.
Think about it. Imagine a traditional rural road composed entirely of packed earth. When the monsoon season arrives, that road doesn't just get a little slippery, it turns into a deep, impassable river of mud.
Oh, right, so you can't drive anything heavy on it.
You can't drive anything on it at all. For 3 or 4 months out of the year, a village with a dirt road is effectively under quarantine.
Wow.
You cannot export your agricultural surplus to the market, which means your goods rot in the village. You cannot import medicine, tools, or building materials. The velocity of money just drops to zero.
So paving that road or even just putting down heavy gravel essentially turns the economy on year-round.
Exactly.
It's like upgrading a business from a dial-up modem that constantly disconnects every time it rains to a fiber optic broadband connection. Suddenly, Palampur is permanently plugged into the regional markets of Rayganj and Shapur.
That's a great analogy.
And the text keeps going, describing what's actually on that broadband connection. It says, quote, many kinds of transport are visible on this road, starting from bullock carts, tongas, bogies, wooden cart drawn by buffaloes, loaded with jaggery, gur, and other commodities, to motor vehicles like motorcycles, jeeps, tractors, and trucks, end quote.
You can literally see the friction of technological transition happening right on that asphalt.
Yeah, it's a wild image. Wooden carts drawn by buffaloes sharing the exact same lane with diesel trucks.
Right, so you have vehicles operating on muscle and calorie power next to combustion engines,
Yeah.
hauling jaggery, which is unrefined sugar, right alongside manufactured motor vehicles. It's a collision of centuries.
But to understand who is actually driving the trucks and who is walking behind the buffaloes, we have to look at the demographics, right?
Yeah, we have to look at the people.
Because the source material doesn't shy away from the harsh social realities of this place. Let me read the passage on the village's makeup. Quote, this village has about 450 families belonging to several different castes. The 80 upper caste families own the majority of land in the village. Their houses, some of them quite large, are made of brick with cement plastering. The SC's Dalits comprise 1/3 of the population and live in one corner of the village and in much smaller houses, some of which are of mud and straw, end quote.
We have to really pause here because this upends that whole myth of the idyllic, egalitarian farming village where everyone just helps each other out.
Yeah, the math is stark. Economics is fundamentally dictated by sociology and history here.
Precisely. We have a population of 450 families, but the underlying assets, the wealth-generating mechanisms, are radically concentrated.
80 families hold the majority of the land.
Just 80.
And their physical reality entirely reflects that ownership. They live in large houses made of permanent manufactured materials like brick and cement.
While a full third of the population, which is around 150 Dalit families who have been historically marginalized, are relegated to a specific corner of the village.
Living in structures made of mud and straw.
And this isn't just an architectural detail, it's an economic drain.
How so?
Mud and straw require constant, exhausting maintenance. A heavy rain damages a mud house, requiring the family to spend precious time and caloric energy rebuilding it.
Time they can't spend working.
Exactly. Time they cannot spend earning a wage or acquiring new skills.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the families in the brick houses are shielded from that environmental tax.
Oh, that makes so much sense. It sets up a structural inequality that we are going to see dictate every single economic outcome later in this deep dive.
If you own the land, you own the factory.
And if you don't own the land, the only thing you have to sell is the sweat off your back.
It's a brutal reality.
But there is one equalizer, or at least an accelerant, that the text highlights regarding the village's public services.
The grid.
Yes, the grid. Here is the next passage. Quote, most of the houses have electric connections. Electricity powers all the tube wells in the fields and is used in various types of small business. Palampur has 2 primary schools and 1 high school. There is a primary health center run by the government and 1 private dispensary where the sick are treated. The description above shows that Palampur has fairly well-developed system of roads, transport, electricity, irrigation, schools, and health center, end quote.
So for a rural village, having high schools and multiple healthcare options places Palampur in a highly privileged percentile right off the bat.
Definitely. But the most disruptive technology mentioned in that entire paragraph has to be the electric tube well.
Oh, absolutely.
The text notes that electricity powers all the tube wells. Let's break down the mechanics of a tube well for a beginner who might picture, like, a traditional stone wishing well with a wooden bucket.
Yeah, it's nothing like a wishing well. A traditional well relies on human or animal labor to hoist a relatively small volume of water to the surface.
Which takes forever.
Forever. Sometimes farmers used a Persian wheel, where a team of bullocks just walks in a circle to turn a gear that pulls up a chain of water pots. It is agonizingly slow. Your ability to irrigate your crops is severely bottlenecked by animal endurance and the time it takes to literally pull the water up.
Meaning you are still largely rolling the dice, praying the monsoon rains come on time and in the right amounts.
Right, you're at the mercy of the weather. But an electric tube well is a deep, narrow pipe driven straight into the underground aquifer, powered by a motorized pump.
So no animals required.
None. You flip a switch, and you get a massive, continuous high-pressure flow of water.
Wow.
It completely decouples agricultural production from the weather.
So electricity here isn't just a luxury for, reading a book at night. It is industrial horsepower.
Yes, it's the invisible force multiplying the productivity of the land and, as the text notes, jump-starting small businesses.
This infrastructure, the road, the schools, the health center, the grid, it acts as a multiplier. It ensures that when human effort is applied, it yields a much higher return.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have a really clear picture of Palampur's physical and social geography now. But here's where the source material pivots.
We're getting into the theory.
Yeah, it moves from the tangible dirt of the village to the abstract laws of economic theory. It lays out the 4 primary requirements for production.
The undeniable laws of gravity for any economy.
Right. Let's look at how the text defines the first 2. Quote, "The aim of production is to produce the goods and services that we want. There are 4 requirements for production of goods and services. The first requirement is land and other natural resources such as water, forests, minerals.
Okay, land?
The second requirement is labor, i.e., people who will do the work. Some production activities require highly educated workers to perform the necessary tasks. Other activities require workers who can do manual work. Each worker is providing the labor necessary for production." End quote.
So if you are going to bake a cake, you need a kitchen and you need ingredients. In macroeconomics, those raw ingredients fall under the umbrella term of land.
And the text makes a point to expand that definition. It says land and other natural resources such as water, forests, minerals. So it's not merely real estate.
No, not at all. Land with a capital L represents every single thing that the planet provides for free without human intervention.
Okay, give me an example.
If you are operating a solar farm, the sunlight is your land. If you run a commercial fishing fleet, the ocean currents and the fish populations are your land. It is the uncreated baseline of physical reality.
Got it. And nothing happens to that physical reality until you apply the second requirement, which is labor.
Right.
But again, the text offers a spectrum, pointing out that some tasks require highly educated workers, while others require manual effort.
We often trap ourselves into thinking of labor exclusively as physical exertion. Swinging an axe, carrying bricks.
Wetting in a field.
Exactly. And that manual labor is foundational. But a neurosurgeon performing a 10-hour operation is providing labor. A programmer typing lines of Python code to route logistics is providing labor.
So labor is simply human time and biological energy directed toward a productive goal. So we have the raw materials from nature, and we have the human beings ready to exert energy. But if I just stand naked in a forest with a lot of enthusiasm, I am not going to produce much value.
Probably not.
That brings us to the third requirement, which introduces some really critical business mechanics. Here is the passage on physical capital.
Okay, read it.
Quote, "The third requirement is physical capital, i.e., the variety of inputs required at every stage during production. What are the items that come under physical capital? A, tools, machines, buildings. Tools and machines range from very simple tools such as a farmer's plow to sophisticated machines such as generators, turbines, computers, etc. Tools, machines, buildings can be used in production over many years and are called fixed capital."
Fixed capital.
Right. And B, raw materials and money in hand. Production requires a variety of raw materials, such as the yarn used by the weaver and the clay used by the potter. Also, some money is always required during production to make payments and buy other necessary items. Raw materials and money in hand are called working capital. Unlike tools, machines, and buildings, these are used up in production. End quote.
This distinction right here between fixed capital and working capital is where most small businesses either succeed or go entirely bankrupt.
Really? It's that critical.
Oh, yeah. If you, as a listener, have ever tried to launch a startup or even just a side hustle, you have wrestled with this exact tension.
Let's ground this in a highly relatable scenario outside of farming, just to prove the text's point that these rules apply everywhere.
Okay, let's do it.
Imagine I want to open an independent coffee shop.
All right, let's run the numbers on your coffee shop. What is your fixed capital?
Well, my fixed capital would be the commercial lease on the storefront, the custom carpentry for the counter, the tables and chairs, and the massive $10,000 commercial espresso machine.
And why does the text classify those as fixed?
Because I only have to purchase them once, or at least very infrequently. The espresso machine doesn't just evaporate after I pull one shot of espresso.
Exactly.
It stays bolted to the counter, facilitating production for years.
It is the heavy machinery of your business. In Palampur, fixed capital is the brick-and-mortar building, the electric tube well, the tractor, or even the hand-carved wooden plow. It remains constant across multiple production cycles.
Great.
Now, what is the working capital suffocating your coffee shop's margins?
The working capital is everything that gets destroyed or consumed in the act of making a latte.
Like what?
The roasted coffee beans, the gallons of whole milk, the paper cups, the cardboard sleeves,
Yeah?
and crucially, the text mentions money in hand, so the actual cash liquidity in my register to give a customer change, or the balance in my business checking account to make payroll for my baristas on Friday.
And that liquidity is vital. Working capital is the daily fuel. If you have an incredible state-of-the-art espresso machine, which is massive fixed capital, but you run out of cash to buy milk on a Tuesday morning, your production drops to absolute zero.
I can't sell a latte without milk.
You are out of business. The physical capital must be a balanced equation of long-term assets and short-term fuel.
This brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. We have nature's gifts, human sweat, long-term tools, and short-term fuel.
All four.
Wait, no, that's only three, because all of those things can sit in a room and do absolutely nothing without an organizing force.
Ah, right. The fourth requirement.
Here's the passage on the fourth requirement. Quote, there is a fourth requirement, too. You will need knowledge and enterprise to be able to put together land, labor, and physical capital and produce an output either to use yourself or to sell in the market. This, these days, is called human capital. Every production is organized by combining land, labor, physical capital, and human capital, which are known as factors of production. End quote.
Knowledge and enterprise. That is a brilliant distillation.
Yeah, it really simplifies it.
Because you can have all the flour, sugar, ovens, and bakers in the world. But if no one has the recipe for a cake or the courage to take the financial risk of turning the oven on, you just have a messy kitchen.
Enterprise is the risk-taking element.
Yes.
It's the entrepreneur who looks at the raw dirt, looks at the unemployed workers, looks at a tractor and says, if I take out a loan and organize these three things, I can create a surplus.
Human capital is the invisible connective tissue. It is the managerial intelligence that dictates how the other three physical factors are actually deployed.
And as we'll see, when one of the physical factors runs out, it is human capital that is forced to innovate a way out of the crisis.
Which is exactly what happens next.
Right, which brings us to the harsh reality of life in Palampur.
What?
We have our theoretical rules. Now let's watch them buckle under pressure.
The stress test.
The central tension of this village, and really of human history up until very recently, is a massive constraint. Let me read the passage that outlines the crisis. Quote, 1. Land is fixed. Farming is the main production activity in Palampur. 75% of the people who are working are dependent on farming for their livelihood.
75%. That's huge.
Yeah. They could be farmers or farm laborers. The well-being of these people is closely related to production on the farms. But remember that there is a basic constraint in raising farm production. Land area under cultivation is practically fixed.
Fixed.
Since 1960 in Palampur, there has been no expansion in land area under cultivation. By then, some of the wastelands in the village had been converted to cultivable land. There exists no further scope to increase farm production by bringing new land under cultivation. End quote.
Okay, so we are hitting the wall, the Malthusian trap here.
The Malthusian trap, explain that for us.
So Thomas Malthus was an 18th century cleric who theorized a very grim future for humanity. He observed that human populations grow exponentially. You know, parents have 3 kids who each have 3 kids and so on.
Yeah, the population balloons.
But agricultural production, at least historically, only grows arithmetically. You can only clear so much forest per year. You just add a little bit of land each time.
And in Palampur, they have hit the absolute physical limit of their geography. By 1960, every single square inch of usable dirt, even the marginal wasteland, had been plowed. They cannot expand the borders.
Yet the population continues to grow. 75% of the working population relies entirely on this fixed asset.
Right.
If you have 500 people relying on 100 hectares of land in 1960, and by 1980 you have 1,000 people relying on that exact same 100 hectares, the math suggests mass starvation.
Because the fixed capital cannot physically expand to accommodate the growing labor pool.
Exactly.
So how do they survive? If you can't increase the total area of the factory, you have to figure out how to run the factory more efficiently.
You have to hack the system.
And the text introduces two distinct hacks to get around this geographical constraint. Let's look at the first one, which is multiple cropping. Here's the passage. Quote 2. Is there a way one can grow more from the same land? In the kind of crops grown and facilities available, Palampur would resemble a village of the western part of the state of Uttar Pradesh. All land is cultivated in Palampur. No land is left idle.
No land is left idle.
Right. During the rainy season, Kharif, farmers grow jowar and bajra. These plants are used as cattle feed. It is followed by cultivation of potato between October and December.
Okay.
In the winter season, Rabi, fields are sown with wheat. From the wheat produced, farmers keep enough wheat for the family's consumption and sell the surplus wheat at the market at Rayganj. A part of the land area is also devoted to sugarcane, which is harvested once every year. Sugarcane, in its raw form, or as jaggery, is sold to traders in Shahpur. End quote.
This is a masterclass in asset utilization. The phrase "no land is left idle" is the absolute key to their survival.
The schedule they maintain is relentless. Let's track the calendar of this dirt, right? It starts with the rainy season, the Kharif crops. They plant jowar and bajra, which are hardy millets.
And the text notes these are used for cattle feed. So the first priority is fueling the animal labor and the dairy supply.
And the moment that millet is harvested, the land doesn't rest. They immediately transition into a completely different biological cycle, planting potatoes in the short autumn window between October and December.
Potatoes are incredibly calorically dense and grow rapidly underground.
Then, as soon as the potatoes are pulled up, they transition to the winter rabi season, sowing wheat. Wheat is the primary cash crop. It's the staple that they eat and sell to the market in Rayganj for hard currency.
And concurrently, on a dedicated patch of land, they have a long-term asset growing.
The sugarcane.
Yes, the sugarcane, which takes a full 12 months to mature. What the farmers of Palampur are doing is optimizing the biological bandwidth of the soil.
The biological bandwidth. I like that.
Different crops pull different specific nutrients from the earth and have different water requirements. By aggressively rotating millets, tubers, and cereals, they are running their manufacturing plant 365 days a year.
But even with the most brilliant crop rotation, a single stalk of wheat will only produce so many grains. You eventually hit a biological ceiling.
You do.
Which leads us to the second hack, perhaps the most consequential shift in human history.
The Green Revolution.
Yes. Let's read the passage on the Green Revolution. Quote, "You have seen that one way of increasing production from the same land is by multiple cropping. The other way is to use modern farming methods for higher yield. Yield is measured as crop produce on a given piece of land during a single season.
Mm-hmm.
Till the mid-1960s, the seeds used in cultivation were traditional ones with relatively low yields. Traditional seeds needed less irrigation. Farmers used cow dung and other natural manure as fertilizers. All these were readily available with the farmers who did not have to buy them."
So it was a closed loop.
Right. Then it says, the Green Revolution in the late 1960s introduced the Indian farmer to cultivation of wheat and rice using high-yielding varieties, HYVs of seeds. Compared to the traditional seeds, the HYV seeds promise to produce much greater amounts of grain on a single plant. As a result, the same piece of land would now produce far larger quantities of food grains than was possible earlier. End quote.
We have to understand how monumental this shift in human capital was. Agronomists like Norman Borlaug essentially re-engineered the genetic architecture of the plants we eat.
How so? The text mentions traditional seeds having low yields.
Well, a traditional wheat plant grew very tall to compete for sunlight. But if you fertilized it heavily to try and get more grain, the seed head at the top became way too heavy.
Oh, I
The tall stalk would snap in the wind, and the crop would rot on the ground.
So you couldn't just force it to grow more.
Exactly. The geneticists solved this by breeding dwarf varieties of wheat and rice. They created plants with short, incredibly thick, sturdy stalks that could support massive, heavy heads of grain without collapsing.
Oh, wow.
The plant directed its biological energy not into growing tall, but into producing edible seeds. This is the high-yielding variety, the HYV seed. It defied the Malthusian trap by allowing a single hectare of land to suddenly produce exponentially more calories.
But, this feels a bit like a magic trick. You take a new seed, push it into the same dirt, and suddenly you get 3 times as much food.
Yeah, if you are a listener with any business experience, your alarm bells are ringing right now.
Because there is no such thing as a free lunch in economics.
Never.
Let's read the next passage, which reveals the hidden cost of these miraculous yields. Quote, HYV seeds, however, needed plenty of water and also chemical fertilizers and pesticides to produce best results.
Oh, there it is.
Higher yields were possible only from a combination of HYV seeds, irrigation, chemical fertilizers, pesticides, etc. Farmers of Punjab, Haryana, and western Uttar Pradesh were the first to try out the modern farming method in India. The farmers in these regions set up tube wells for irrigation and made use of HYV seeds, chemical fertilizers, and pesticides in farming. Some of them bought farm machinery like tractors and threshers, which made plowing and harvesting faster. They were rewarded with high yields of wheat.
Okay.
In Palampur, the yield of wheat grown from the traditional varieties was 1,300 kilograms per hectare. With HYV seeds, the yield went up to 3,200 kilograms per hectare. There was a large increase in the production of wheat, end quote.
The output numbers are staggering. Going from 1,300 kilos per hectare to 3,200 kilos per hectare is a paradigm shift. You have fundamentally solved the caloric deficit of the village.
But look at the input requirements. The text lays out a massive trap of capital dependency.
It really does. Under the old system, farming was almost entirely a closed, zero-cash loop. You saved traditional seeds from last year's harvest. You fertilized the soil with cow dung from your own animals. The rainfall provided the water. The inputs were free.
But the HYV seeds are the equivalent of high-performance Formula One race cars.
Perfect analogy.
They are capable of astonishing output, but they require highly specialized, expensive fuel to run. You can no longer rely on rainfall. You must have plenty of water, which means you must buy a tube well, drill a bore, and pay for the electricity or diesel to pump thousands of gallons of water.
And you can no longer rely on free cow dung. You have to buy synthetic chemical fertilizers, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium manufactured in industrial plants.
Right. And because these new genetic strains are often highly vulnerable to local insects, you have to purchase chemical pesticides.
The Green Revolution forced the farmer out of a subsistence barter economy and shoved them aggressively into the modern cash economy.
Because to get those high yields, you must have massive amounts of working capital to buy the chemicals and the diesel, and significant fixed capital to buy the tractors and tube wells. And the source material actually includes a suggested activity section for students that points to a really dark, long-term consequence of this shift. It notes, quote, chemical fertilizers provide minerals which dissolve in water and are immediately available to plants, but these may not be retained in the soil, end quote.
Yeah, it hints that this miracle comes with severe environmental degradation.
Right.
It is the biological equivalent of running a machine constantly in the red zone. Chemical fertilizers bypass the natural microbial life of the soil, acting like a direct sugar injection to the plant.
So it's not sustainable.
No, over decades, this kills the organic matter in the earth. The soil becomes hard and dead, requiring even more chemical fertilizer the next year just to achieve the same yield, while the excess chemicals leach down and poison the underground water table. The short-term economic miracle creates a long-term ecological debt.
Okay, so we've established that to survive, farming became incredibly capital intensive. It requires money, machines, and chemicals. So how does this impact the actual human beings living in Palampur? Let's turn our attention to the people. Because when a system requires massive capital, those without it are going to get crushed.
It's inevitable.
Here is the passage detailing the reality of land ownership. Quote, you can see the large number of small plots scattered around the village in the picture. These are cultivated by the small farmers. On the other hand, more than half the area of the village is covered by plots that are quite large in size.
Okay.
In Palampur, there are 60 families of medium and large farmers who cultivate more than 2 hectares of land. A few of the large farmers have land extending over 10 hectares or more, end quote.
So we see the division again.
Right. And the text provides a heartbreaking specific example about a farmer named Gobind. It says, quote, each one now has a plot of land that is only 0.75 hectare in size. Even with improved irrigation and modern farming method, Gobind's sons are not able to make a living from their land. They have to look for additional work during part of the year, end quote.
This passage forces us to confront the math of generational wealth fragmentation. It completely undermines the idea that hard work alone guarantees survival.
Oh, so.
Well, Gobind was a farmer with a modest amount of land. When he passed away, custom dictated that his land be divided equally among his sons. Now, each son is left with a microplot of just 0.75 hectares.
To visualize that, a hectare is roughly the size of a standard track and field stadium, so they're farming an area smaller than a football field.
And the text delivers a brutal economic verdict. Even with improved irrigation and modern farming method, Gobind's sons are not able to make a living. This is crucial.
Wait, we just spent 20 minutes talking about how HYV seeds tripled the yield per hectare. Why wouldn't it matter?
Because of the principle of minimum viable scale.
Minimum viable scale. Okay.
It costs money to run a tube well. It costs money to buy a bag of chemical fertilizer. If your land is only 0.75 hectares, the sheer physical volume of wheat you can produce, even at maximum high-yield efficiency, is not enough to recoup the high cash costs of the modern inputs and feed your family for an entire year.
So the fixed costs just eat you alive.
They do. So Gobind's sons are landowners, technically. But practically, they are failing. Their land isn't large enough to function as a viable business.
Which means, as the text notes, they must look for additional work. They have to step away from their own dirt and sell their time to someone else.
Which perfectly feeds the needs of the 60 families who own the massive plots, the 2-hectare and 10-hectare estates.
Right. Let's look at how that dynamic plays out. Who does the actual sweating in Palampur? Here's the passage.
Let's hear it.
Quote, 5. Who will provide the labor? After land, labor is the next necessary factor for production. Farming requires a great deal of hard work. Small farmers, along with their families, cultivate their own fields. Thus, they provide the labor required for farming themselves. Medium and large farmers hire farm laborers to work on their fields, end quote.
This describes a stark class division based entirely on the scale of your assets.
If you are a small farmer, your family is the workforce. You are the owner, the manager, and the heavy machinery. You pull the weeds, you dig the trenches.
But if you own 10 hectares of land, it is physically impossible for one family to plant, maintain, and harvest that acreage in the short seasonal windows dictated by multiple cropping.
You just can't do it alone.
No. You have crossed a threshold where your capital requires external labor to function. You must go to the open market and buy human sweat.
And who are they buying? They are hiring the marginalized Dalit families who own no land at all, and they are hiring the struggling small farmers like Gobind's sons who desperately need cash to offset the losses on their microplots.
This creates a massive pool of desperate workers.
It really does. Let's look at the reality of negotiating in that market. The source material introduces us to two specific individuals. Here is the passage.
Okay.
Quote, Dalla is a landless farm laborer who works on daily wages in Palampur. This means he must regularly look for work. The minimum wages for a farm laborer set by the government is Rs 300 per day, March 2019, but Dalla gets only Rs 160. There is heavy competition for work among the farm laborers in Palampur, so people agree to work for lower wages. Dalla complains about his situation to Ramkali, who is another farm laborer. Dalla and Ramkali are among the poorest native of the village. End quote.
Yeah, that is tough to read.
This passage is infuriating, frankly. The government, the highest authority in the land, has analyzed the cost of living and legally mandated a minimum wage of 300 rupees per day. Yet Dalla is working for 160 rupees. That is nearly half the legal limit.
Right.
How does a wealthy landowner blatantly ignore a statutory law without consequence?
Because the laws of supply and demand are often far more powerful than the laws written on a piece of government parchment. Dalla is trapped in a structural monopsony.
Monopsony? What's that?
It's a market condition where there are many sellers, but very few buyers.
Okay, let's break down exactly how that negotiation happens. Why doesn't Dalla just demand the 300 rupees?
Picture the scenario. It's early morning during the wheat harvest. Dalla walks up to the estate of a farmer who owns 10 hectares. Dalla asks for the legal wage of 300 rupees. The landowner doesn't need to threaten him or argue with him.
He just says no.
He simply points to the 50 other landless laborers standing right behind Dalla And the 50 small farmers like Gobin's sons were also desperate for cash.
Right. The text explicitly says there's heavy competition for work.
The supply of labor is astronomical, but the demand for labor is artificially low.
Why is the demand low if they have 10 hectares to harvest?
Because that rich farmer bought a tractor. He bought a mechanical thresher. He has replaced hundreds of hours of human labor with diesel-powered physical capital. So he only needs a handful of men.
It is a horrific race to the bottom. If Dela refuses the 160 rupees on principle, the man behind him, whose children are equally hungry, will accept 150 rupees. The abundance of their only asset, their physical labor, completely destroys its value. The landowner holds all the leverage because he can afford to let his field sit for a day, but Dala cannot afford to let his stomach sit empty for a day.
It perfectly illustrates how an oversupply of labor crushes wage growth. Dala and Ramkali aren't poor because they don't work hard. They are poor because the economic structure of the village actively depreciates the value of their sweat.
Wow. Okay, so we see who is being crushed by the system, but we also know wealth is being generated, right? 3,200 kilos of wheat per hectare is a lot of food.
It's a massive amount.
Where does the money actually go, and how does it compound? Our next section follows the money trail. Let's look at the passage describing how capital is generated and hoarded.
All right.
Quote 7. Sale of surplus farm products. Let us suppose that the farmers have produced wheat on their lands using the 3 factors of production. The wheat is harvested and production is complete. What do the farmers do with the wheat? They retain a part of the wheat for the family's consumption and sell the surplus wheat.
Sell the surplus.
Right. Small farmers like Savita and Gobin's sons have little surplus wheat because their total production is small, and from this, a substantial share is kept for their own family needs. In contrast to the small farmers, the medium and large farmers have their own savings from farming.
Savings.
They are thus able to arrange for the capital needed. How do these farmers have their own savings? Some farmers might also use the savings to buy cattle, trucks, or to set up shops. End quote.
This is the Rosetta Stone of capitalism right here. The entire concept of economic mobility hinges on a single word in that passage: surplus.
Let's define surplus clearly for the listener. It is simply the delta between what you produce and what you are forced to consume just to stay alive.
Exactly. Let's run a thought experiment, contrasting our two groups.
Okay.
Take a small farmer, like Gobin's sons. Let's say their tiny 0.75 hectare plot produces 100 units of wheat in a season. However, they have a family of 5. To provide enough calories for that family to survive the year without starving, they must consume 95 units of that wheat.
Leaving them with a surplus of exactly 5 units. They take those 5 units to the market in Riganj. The cash they get for those 5 units is barely enough to buy a few basic necessities like clothing or cooking oil.
And crucially, it is absolutely not enough cash to buy next year's expensive HYV seeds, chemical fertilizers, or tube well electricity.
Because they generate almost zero surplus, they generate zero savings.
Yes. They are forced into debt just to plant the next crop. They are trapped in a vicious cycle of subsistence, eating their own capital just to survive.
Now let's look at the large farmer, the one with 10 hectares. His land produces 10,000 units of wheat. But here is the biological reality. His family's stomachs aren't magically 100 times larger than the small farmer's family.
No, they are not.
His family also only needs to consume about 95 units of wheat to survive the year.
Which leaves him with a breathtaking surplus of 9,905 units of wheat.
Oh, wow.
He loads that massive surplus onto trucks, drives down the all-weather road to the wholesalers in Shahpur, and converts it into a mountain of liquid cash.
That cash is his retained earnings. And what does he do with it? The text says he uses his savings to arrange for the capital needed.
He self-finances.
Right. He doesn't have to borrow money at predatory interest rates to buy next year's seeds or fertilizer.
But he doesn't stop there. He takes the excess cash and buys more fixed capital. The text notes he might buy cattle, extending into dairy. He might buy trucks, moving into logistics, or he might set up a shop.
The rich get richer through the mechanical, unstoppable snowball effect of surplus capital. Once you cross the threshold where your production vastly exceeds your consumption, your excess capital begins to work for you, spinning off new revenue streams.
While the poor, unable to generate surpluses, remained perfectly stagnant.
But notice where that large farmer is putting his excess capital. He's buying trucks and setting up shops. He is moving his money out of agriculture.
Which is key.
Because that represents the only viable future for this village. Let's read the passage exploring the non-farm economy because this is where the constraints of physical land begin to loosen.
Let's do it.
Quote, non-farm activities in Palampur. We have learnt about farming as the main production activity in Palampur. We shall now take a look at some of the non-farm production activities. Only 25% of the people working in Palampur are engaged in activities other than agriculture.
So only a quarter of them.
Right. 1, dairy, the other common activity. 2, small-scale manufacturing. 3, shopkeepers. People involved in trade, exchange of goods are not many in Palampur. The traders of Palampur are shopkeepers who buy various goods from wholesale markets in the cities and sell them in the village.
Okay.
You will see small general stores in the village selling a wide range of items like rice, wheat, sugar, tea, oil, biscuits, soap, toothpaste, batteries, candles, notebooks, pen, pencil, even some cloth.
Quite an inventory.
Yeah. 4, transport, a fast developing sector. There are a variety of vehicles on the road connecting Palampur to Rayganj. Rickshawalas, tongawalas, jeep, tractor, truck drivers, and people driving the traditional bullock cart and bogie are people in the transport services. They ferry people and goods from one place to another and in return get paid for it. End quote.
The village has realized that the land is maxed out. Even with multiple cropping and HYV seeds, you cannot cram more farmers onto a finite piece of dirt.
You just can't.
The only way the local GDP can grow is by diversifying into sectors that do not require hectares of space.
And right now, only 25% of the workforce has managed to make that leap. Let's walk through these escape routes because they mirror the development of every modern nation.
Sure.
First, we have dairy. This makes sense as a transitional step. You don't need a lot of land to keep a few buffaloes, just enough to grow some jowar and bajra for feed.
And dairy provides something vital that seasonal agriculture does not. Daily cash flow.
Oh, that's right.
You harvest wheat once a season, but a buffalo produces milk every single morning. That milk can be sold at the collection center in Rayganj, giving a family immediate, liquid working capital to buy daily necessities without going into debt.
The second sector is small-scale manufacturing. Now, the text makes a point to distinguish this from the massive factories you'd see in a city.
Right, this is classic cottage industry. It's taking raw materials and applying human capital to add value right in the backyard.
Give us an example.
It might be taking the sugarcane grown in the fields and running it through a mechanical crusher to boil it down into jaggery. It might be weaving baskets or making pottery. The physical footprint is tiny, just a small shed, but it captures the value add locally instead of shipping raw materials away.
The third sector is fascinating because it introduces complex logistics to the village. The shopkeepers.
Yes, the traders.
The text lists the inventory of these small general stores. Sugar, tea, oil, soap, batteries, notebooks. They aren't manufacturing these items. They're acting as an arbitrage on time and distance.
Exactly. Think about the economic value a shopkeeper provides. If a farmer's flashlight dies, he needs a battery. Before the shopkeeper existed, that farmer would have to waste an entire day walking to the city of Shahpur to buy one battery.
The opportunity cost of that lost day of labor is massive.
But the local shopkeeper travels to the wholesale markets in the city, buys 500 batteries at a discount, transports them back to Palampur, and stocks them in a front-room store.
He charges a slight premium on the battery, but the farmer gladly pays it because it saves him a day of travel.
The shopkeeper is monetizing distribution and convenience. It is the exact same underlying logic as Amazon, just scaled down to a dirt floor room.
And finally, the fourth sector, which the text highlights as a fast-developing sector. Transport. Rickshaws, jeeps, trucks, tractors. This loops us all the way back to our very first discussion about the all-weather road.
Transport is the circulatory system of the non-farm economy. Without the truck driver, the dairy farmer's milk spoils before it reaches the chilling center in the city.
Without the jeep driver, the shopkeeper cannot haul the wholesale inventory back to his store.
Right. The transport sector monetizes movement. And as the agricultural sector gets more efficient with machines, shedding excess labor, driving a transport vehicle becomes the most viable lifeline for men who can no longer find work in the fields.
Okay, we have arrived at the final synthesis of our source material. This concluding passage ties together the entire economic trajectory of Palampur. It acknowledges the problem, identifies the solution, and points out the specific roadblocks preventing growth.
Let's hear it.
Here is the final text. Quote, in the future, one would like to see more non-farm production activities in the village. Unlike farming, non-farm activities require little land. People with some amount of capital can set up non-farm activities. How does one obtain this capital?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. One can either use his own savings, but more often has to take a loan. It is important that loan be available at low rate of interest so that even people without savings can start some non-farm activity. Another thing which is essential for expansion of non-farm activities is to have markets where the goods and services produced can be sold. In Palampur, we saw the neighboring villages, towns, and cities provide the markets for milk, jaggery, wheat, etc. As more villages get connected to towns and cities through good roads, transport, and telephone, it is possible that the opportunities for non-farm activities in the village would increase in the coming years. End quote.
The author is essentially writing a prescription for rural economic development here. Because land is fixed and tapped out, the non-farm sector is the only avenue for future prosperity.
The text highlights the central appeal. Non-farm activities require little land. You can open a tailor shop or a repair garage on a footprint the size of a living room. Space is no longer the binding constraint.
But the moment you solve the land constraint, you crash immediately into the capital constraint.
Because you need capital to set up these activities. You need to buy the sewing machine to be a tailor, or the initial inventory of soap and batteries to be a shopkeeper.
And as we proved earlier, if you are a landless laborer like Dala or a struggling micro-farmer like Gobin's sons, you consume 100% of your income just trying not to starve. You have zero savings. You cannot self-finance.
So the text says, you must take a loan.
But the text inserts a massive, flashing warning sign here. It is important that loan be available at low rate of interest. This is the friction point that keeps millions of people in poverty.
Let's explain why the interest rate dictates success or failure here. If I want to open a small shop in Palampur and I can't get a bank loan because I have no collateral, I have to go to the informal village moneylender who happens to be the large landowner who already exploits me.
And that moneylender might charge you an interest rate of 5% per month, which compounds to roughly 80% a year.
That's absurd.
So you borrow the money, you buy the inventory, you take all the entrepreneurial risk, you sit in the shop 14 hours a day. But because the interest payments are so suffocatingly high, every single rupee of profit you generate is siphoned directly back to the moneylender.
You are effectively working as an indentured servant for the creditor. You never accumulate your own surplus.
This is exactly why the text pleads for institutional credit fair loans at reasonable rates from real banks. It is the only way to allow the poorest citizens to leverage their human capital and climb into the non-farm economy.
And the final piece of the prescription is market access. Expanding on the road and transport infrastructure, you can produce all the beautiful pottery or delicious jaggery in the world, but if your village is disconnected, you have no customers.
Demand must be imported from the towns and cities. The all-weather road, the telephone connections, these are the bridges that allow surplus production to meet external demand.
So we have spent an hour dissecting a few pages of a textbook about a village that doesn't even exist on a map. But by breaking down the text, sentence by sentence, we haven't just learned about farming in Uttar Pradesh. We have mapped the fundamental DNA of capitalism.
We really have. We started by identifying the unshakable ingredients of any enterprise: land, labor, physical capital, and the human capital required to direct them. We watch what happens when a hard geographical constraint forces human ingenuity into overdrive, resulting in the scientific miracle of the Green Revolution.
And we didn't look away from the collateral damage. We examined how the initial ownership of assets, who owns the land versus who only owns their labor, creates a snowball effect.
The large landowners compound their massive surpluses into new businesses, while the landless are crushed by the oversupply of their own sweat, stripped of their negotiating power, and forced to work for illegal wages.
Finally, we saw the only viable escape hatch, the transition from an economy based on the limits of physical dirt to an economy based on services, retail, and manufacturing. An escape hatch that remains firmly locked unless a society can provide its poorest citizens with fair access to credit and infrastructure.
You know, if you look around your own life, you will see the ghosts of Palampur everywhere. Yeah. If you are struggling to pay off high-interest credit card debt while trying to start a side hustle, you are fighting the exact same working capital battle as the aspiring shopkeeper in the village.
Or if you are a freelancer competing on a global platform against thousands of others willing to work for pennies, you are experiencing the exact same brutal supply and demand wage suppression as Dela, the farm laborer. The rules are universal, only the scale changes.
Completely.
Which leaves me with one incredibly provocative thought to mull over. for you, our listener. Palampur showed us that when humanity hit the absolute physical limit of arable land, human capital intervened. Agronomists fundamentally reprogrammed the genetics of a seed to extract more value from the exact same patch of dirt.
It was a massive leap.
Today, we are looking at a modern global economy where physical capital is becoming increasingly digitized. We are seeing artificial intelligence begin to automate not just physical labor, but complex, highly educated cognitive labor.
It's happening fast.
As our algorithms become capable of performing the organizational tasks of the entrepreneur, and as digital platforms completely replace physical real estate, are we accelerating toward a future where human capital, our ingenuity, our creativity, our raw intellect will eventually become the only factor of production that holds any true premium value? Or, regardless of how advanced our technology becomes, will our economies always be tethered ultimately to the hard, unyielding constraints of the physical earth beneath our feet? Something to think about.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.